All right, so welcome to Let's Chat. So today I have Brandon King with us, and Brandon has a long history of real estate experience. He started out working with his family, doing contracting work and remodeling. He has a master's in business. He is a real estate agent. He formerly was a property manager until almost a year ago, and he sold his company. Recovering property manager, I understand that. You're an appraiser now too, right?
Trainee appraiser, working to get that certification. So it's in process.
Yeah. So a lot of good real estate experience, doing a lot of different things. Did I miss anything, or is there anything else that you do?
I mean, I'm pretty.
You're pretty.
But other than that, I think everybody can see that. That's an obvious thing.
He's pretty, and he gives some of the best dating advice. So if we have time when we're done, Brandon will talk to us about how to find, attract, and keep the man or woman of your dreams. So you want to stay around for that.
That's right. Not of my dreams, of your dreams. That's
your dreams.
Exactly. An important distinction.
All right, so we're going to talk about the real estate market. We're going to focus on our local real estate market in Chattanooga first. Go over some information there, give a market update, and then we're going to get into some more bigger picture stuff after that. So Brandon, go ahead and go through your presentation, and we'll talk about it.
So a lot of things, of course, have been happening in the Chattanooga market. Everybody's heard about the interest rates. But one of the things I like to do is kind of give a range. A lot of people ask me things like, okay, well, what kind of adjustments are you seeing for this type of thing and that sort of thing? So some of the big ones are going to be your square footage. Everybody thinks like, okay, you're above ground, or what's the price per square foot, right? That's something you hear a lot. And it's, say $150. Well, if somebody has one extra square foot than you, it's not just you add $150. In fact, in the Chattanooga market, that number ranges around $40 to $70 a square foot for additional high or low value. Finished basement square footage, that's actually going to be a little bit less, more like 30 to 50. You've actually seen that number kind of get a little closer to above ground square footage, mostly because of price pressures. So that's definitely been helpful in terms of the basement square footage, basement homes for our area, which we have plenty of in Chattanooga. One of the big things that's been most notable is that new homes don't sell for a lot more than homes built in the 2000, 2005, 2010 range right now. Because of the price pressures, a new home used to be $40,000, $50,000 more, all else equal. But what we've seen lately is no one's willing to put that extra premium on a house because it's brand new. They're okay with almost new. So that's been a very interesting development over the last probably 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, I think probably also the inventory problem too, especially around the median price point. I think that's pushed that up a lot because I know that went above 300,000, almost 330,000 last summer for the median price. I think that's probably part of what you're seeing there too.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, I have a chart here in a little bit that'll touch a little bit deeper into that.
Good.
So that you can see kind of the breakdowns where we're having a little more difficulties on the market in terms of price points. Obviously, not having an HVAC unit, that's going to have a $30,000 to $60,000 impact. Even though it's only $10,000 to add an HVAC, there's a lot of hidden information in that. A lot of homes that don't have a working HVAC system probably have other issues. So it's kind of a proxy for bad condition and things of that nature. Mobile homes, actually, you'd be surprised, all else equal, if you have a house and a mobile home that all other metrics are very similar, the price delta is only around $40,000 to $80,000. So if you have a $300,000 house, well, maybe more of a $250,000 house, you can actually see prices for a double wide site built, or not site built, double wide on permanent foundation, a few other metrics that make it qualify for FHA, and it'll only be somewhere $40,000 to $80,000 less than that site built comparable home, which is quite fascinating in terms of the price point, because you can get in to the ones that maybe aren't on permanent foundations a lot cheaper. So it can be a great way to get some good cash flow.
Okay.
Or to flip. That's actually a flip that I have going on right now. Is a manufactured home that was not on permanent foundation. Put it on permanent, make a couple of other small adjustments and changes to make it not look the same level of appeal, to increase the level of appeal, and actually increasing the value probably around $70,000 or $80,000 for.
So like, what would be your buyer pool for that? Like, who would you try to sell it to?
Well, it's a family. I mean, it's going to be a family. It's going to be somebody probably making $40,000 to $70,000 a year.
Okay.
Just to give you, and it's a lot of square footage for a low price. So when you have a larger group of people and you need a place to live, You can choose to rent. You can choose to buy a manufactured home that has been nicely redone, or you can continue to save up and hopefully maybe one day, if prices don't exceed your expectations, see what you can afford eventually. So that's basically some of the market is picking buy a manufactured site build or manufactured home on permanent foundation.
Okay. Okay.
So here's some of the positives for our area. These are more binary type metrics, but the price actually does change based on the school scores. So if you have one set of schools where the average score between 0 and 100 is say 50, and one where the schools all average around 60, you're actually going to see a $5,000 to $8,000 delta if everything else is the same, including the neighborhood had the same kind of comps, just literally next door and next door. This house is zoned for these schools. This house is zoned for these schools. $5,000 to $8,000 difference, which I think is one of the more telling things about our area. Because what is it? 2.2 children. Everybody has 2.2 children, so that is enough to actually get into the data and actually make an impact statistically. Master on Main, 10 to 15,000. Half bath. Half bath has actually been impressively high lately. People have been very interested in the half bath. Somewhere 10 to 20,000 is actually the delta price difference, all else equal.
So you're talking about just what that adds to the value.
That's right.
Okay. So yeah,
or takes
just
away
to clarify. Yeah.
Yep. Sorry if I get a little too numbers nerdy. Keep me honest, Eddie. A full bath is somewhere in the 15 to 25,000 range, so there is an improvement there. But a lot of times, what I've seen is if you have a 3-1, and you're looking at the numbers, and if you're in kind of that lower end of the market, a half bath can actually get you almost the same level of price improvement as a full second bath. A garage space, that actually is very variable. That some markets have actually started to not be so interested in paying more for a garage, but on average you see anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000 per garage space in our area.
Tell us a little bit about the bedrooms and bathrooms, because I know that it can be somewhat confusing in terms of like when you go above like 3 bedrooms versus you're having more bedrooms versus more bathrooms. Like what do you see as giving the most value?
I mean, the 3-2 is obviously the go-to standard, but what we're seeing more often is the second bathroom or the half bath, the additional half bath has more value than additional bedroom.
Yeah.
So I will take a 2-bedroom, 2-bath all day over a 3-bedroom, 1-bath. In terms of flipping it, actually in terms of renting it, because one thing, the bare minimum to survive in modern society is a 1-bathroom. So the second bathroom is a decision that is made by some families or individuals and families that is saying, I want some privacy. So they've got a little more selectivity. They want to be a little more picky, and so that's an indication that they can actually afford to be a little more picky. So that's where some of that comes from. But that's, I mean, once you get over 3 bedrooms, the market gets much smaller and tighter.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
The big thing, a lot of people ask me this question a lot. Okay, I'm about to sell my house. What do I need to do to it? And let's say it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath with already has a 2-car garage. Everything's decent. If you do not have granite countertops, that is or quartz, that is one of the best ROIs for a lot of houses that don't have it. Statistically, you're looking at $10,000 to $20,000 for granite, and $20,000 to $30,000 for quartz. I'm sorry, $20,000 to $50,000 for quartz. And I don't know if anybody's priced it lately, but you can get granite built to your house for $3,000, give or take, $1,000 or $2,000. Quartz you can do for another $1,000-ish. So it's one of the best ROIs, particularly if you're in that 25 to 50% of the market, where that can actually be one of the things that really sets you apart.
Yeah.
So, and that actually does also separate from things like convection ovens, pantries. Like that's not just a proxy for a remodeled kitchen. That is actually somewhat tailored for just that metric. And the other one I thought was interesting, cement fiber siding. The market has a real preference for cement fiber siding, statistically significant in the $20,000 to $30,000 range is the value assigned to that statistically based on our local market.
And so these are all things, guys. I mean, especially like you're buying rental properties or properties to flip. You want to know what's going to bring the best ROI, because you can't. I mean, realistically, with any house, you can't fix every single thing. Even if you do most things, unless it's a tear down. But you really want to focus on what things really have to be done. So, I mean, your granite countertops, or if you can put in an extra bathroom, obviously, those are the things you want to focus on. So that's why, like, talking to someone like Brandon is going to be able to help you to do that, because like what's going to bring the best return on those repairs.
And to your point, that's an excellent point. Value add amenities are less interesting right now than repairing the actual house. Make sure it's going to pass a home inspection. The buyers have more negotiating power than they had a year ago, than they had 2 years ago. So they'll get under contract for not above market, not above asking price, and then they'll wear you out on the home inspection. And so that's the other thing you want to make sure of. If I have to pick between a $5,000 repair and electrical that actually costs $5,000 and a $5,000 average value add, more times than not, right now I'm going to put the $5,000 into the electrical, which is not always the case. Sometimes, in some parts of the past, people have been willing to overlook an outdated electrical, but this is not one of those times.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, things that obviously have to pass inspection, your mechanicals and all that. Then you have to look at, you got it functioning the right way. Then what's going to make it look good? What's going to make it sell?
That's right.
So. Good.
So the market itself overall right now, of course, inventory is actually been decreasing. Active listings over the last 4 months, since I guess November, has been down for the Tri-County area that I track, which is Catoosa County, Walker County, and Hamilton County. The sold listings were also dropping over most of that period up until last month. When everybody kind of got a little stir crazy. Now, even though a lot of listings have been leaving the market, a lot of buyers have also not really returned to the market. But because both of those numbers are incredibly low, we're seeing that right now, at least for this past month or two, for the last month or two, sorry. I'm ADD.
No, I think our friend may have distracted us here
a little bit. But buyers have been hungry the last month or two in the bottom half of the market.
I mean, it sounded like you're saying that you see some hesitancy with buyers and sellers both, right?
Yes.
That's what I've seen too.
So overall, just even though we had very tight inventory last year and the year before, we were still selling a bunch of houses. It's just nobody had a bunch of options to pick from. So they're like, okay, here's the 3 that are in your range. You better pick one today or it's going to be gone.
Yeah.
And you're the 15th offer this week. Whereas right now, they're like, hey, there's a couple of options hitting every couple of days. There's 3 or 4 out there right now. They're a little high, but we're expecting them to come down. Maybe we'll make an offer a little low. That's much more the dynamic and the discussion that's going on right now with buyers in this market. As you can see on our next chart to the right there, just the throughput has basically just been going down, including out of residential buyers, people that buy it to live in it, have been going down the sharpest, and in fact it's one of the lowest Januaries we've seen lately in the last few years. But even the out-of-state investors, they had kind of really peaked, Open Door and companies like that, but they are definitely taking note of the changes in the market. And even though this is still a popular area for them, because we have seen better price protection than some of the other markets nationwide, it's still not a gold rush the way it was, a year or two ago.
I mean, really, if you just look at just around the middle of the summer last year, things just very gradually started to cool off. I mean, days on market started to come up a little bit. Inventory started to come up a little bit. So I really just from what I've seen, just with some of our own listings and some of our own deals, it's just that you have like just an overall cooling of the market. It's very gradual, very subtle. But if you look at it over the past really 6-7 months, you can see a difference. And it's still continued this past month. If you look at the MLS stats, I mean, it's still days on market came up just a little bit more. Inventory is just kind of it's kind of just, I don't know, just toggling back and forth. Which way is it going to go?
Right.
But it still is in that trend where things are just cooling off a little bit. So you have, sellers that are, that would have gotten like multiple offers and sold 20K above list price a year ago. Now they're probably selling maybe right at list price, still getting good offers, but it's not as strong as a year ago for the most part. I mean, in general.
I would say, and that's an excellent point, is both have been stepping down kind of in tandem, buyers and sellers leaving the market.
Yeah.
And to your point about middle of last year, that's when rates started really ticking up to that 4.5%, 5%.
Yeah.
And that was honestly a switch point that that mattered a lot. So actually, I want to go to this chart here, and you'll see on there. This chart is over a 6-7 year period. The one on the left. So the red line is the median sale price of houses in our area. The green line is basically backing into what people can afford based on the interest rate, the median income for our area. And you'll see for years, they hang out together, right? And then all of a sudden, about the time you're talking about, when interest rates really started picking up, those lines diverge significantly. And so what the expectation is, because this has been an incredibly fast-paced rate increase, not only in like the Fed funds rate, but also in like the long-term bonds and mortgage bonds, which is what backs into our mortgage rates. And so right now, honestly, from an affordability standpoint, what was affordable at $250 a year ago is now the same. The median family can only afford $200. I mean, that's a 20% drop in terms of affordability on average. Got some pent up demand from people that weren't able to find one last year, the year before. Your hard negotiators that didn't want to be one of 50 people putting in an offer, so they're getting some feel good deals for them. But practically speaking, the affordability is still very low. So one of two things is going to happen. One of two things will fix it in a positive way. Incomes will rise dramatically, which we haven't really seen, and you'll see that in a future slide. Incomes have started to stagnate. Or interest rates will come down back to where they were, not even necessarily all the way down, but if they get to 3s, 4s, that can moderate the situation. But absent one of those two things happening, the only other alternative is price. So, or everybody in California moves to Chattanooga, which we're seeing pieces of that, but California's a big state, so.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, like if you look at just the hesitancy of buyers and sellers, and I've been trying to figure out, what really is that about. And one thing I have noticed some sellers have said over the past few months is if, especially if they have like a low interest rate on the house they're living in, they don't want to go and buy another house and have the interest rate a lot higher, and then they're paying more for another house. I mean, even if it is, a little bit bigger or newer or whatever, that I think has caused hesitancy for sellers, plus uncertainty in the market. And then buyers, I mean, the affordability thing, nothing has really improved, so.
No, right now, basically what you're seeing, you're exactly right. What you're seeing is people that own a home right now are very reluctant because they could buy and sell the same house and their mortgage payment can double. Yeah, I mean, it is very significant. So the people that you have that are buying or selling houses, you've got estates in situations where people passed away. You've got investors that are trying to cash in a little bit, some of those. You'll have flippers that didn't expect prices to stagnate, and you'll have people that are moving to the area. So obviously, if I sold a $2 million house in Phoenix, Arizona, and I can move here, even if the interest rate is higher, I'm buying a similar house for $400,000. The mortgage rate is still much, much lower, or the mortgage payment is still much, much lower. So those are the main buyers you're going to see in the market in times like this.
Interesting.
The other thing, this chart on the right, it's a breakdown of affordability based on what percentage of the population can afford what percentage of the homes. So the blue line is basically what is affordable, and the red lines are what is unaffordable for that segment. So the bottom 10th percent of the house, or 70% of the people can afford the bottom 10% priced homes. And I took out the low incomes below 35,000 for these numbers, because these are people that at some point we could have said, in the recent history, could have said these people could have bought a home.
Yeah.
The 25th percentile, you already start breaking down anything above the 25th percentile. 40% of people can't afford those homes. When you get to the 50th percentile, meaning the median priced home, 70 to 80% of the people can't afford the median priced home right now.
You said can't.
Cannot.
Okay, interesting.
So that alone, when you're talking about the 75th percentile, these are, the luxury, not luxury plus necessarily, just let's say luxury, the $500,000-$600,000 range.
Yeah.
10% of the market can afford that right now.
Yeah.
And that's based on income data from 2021, which we haven't seen a dramatic change in our area since then. So that data should be pretty comparable. And that was the one that was most striking, is the median income. Again, with the bottom chunks of the income ladder taken off, that's
people still
pretty
can't
dramatic.
afford it.
People just can't afford it.
Yeah.
Which ties in with this next one. This is getting into the rental market a little bit. So rental market. So evictions have been pretty much normalized back to where they were before. We're not seeing incredibly high, but we haven't. It definitely wasn't obviously as low as it was during that very divot point, in which is that chart on the right. The one on the left is the rent to income ratio and the median rent. So the rent to income ratio is the blue line, and it's based on the left of the column. But what you'll see is that number tends to hover around 20 to 32% of people's income. And it's just very similar to mortgage, right? That's about what a mortgage payment people can afford. And anytime you see it starts to creep up above 32%, you see a lot of pressures for it to go back down. Well, the last couple of months, we've been pushing that resistance line at the top, meaning that rents have already started to kind of stagnate a little bit, or push past the point where maybe investors' eyes are a little bigger than renters' stomachs, if you will, are willing to pay. So that's another reason why I like to be in the kind of the lower section of the median of the market in terms of the rental as well, because they're having the same problem. Affordability is an issue across the spectrum. One of the things that I thought was very interesting on this one, I have the rent broken out based on bedrooms, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom over time. So the one on the left is the actual numerical value. The one on the right is based on if all of them were at 1 in 2015, which ones have increased the most relative to themselves. And 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms have almost doubled, and 3 and 4 bedrooms are 50-ish% more than they were 7 years ago. Both are dramatically large increases in terms, but the 1 and 2 bedrooms have just been tremendously better performers in terms of overall rent increase and improvement. So in general, I was one of the early people to be very interested in 2 bedrooms, particularly in the Northwest Georgia segment where all of my rentals are. And basically what you're seeing is the family is shrinking. The average family is shrinking. The size, divorce, of course, has a factor. And just, people age out. Somebody passes away, somebody moves away, young people deciding to hold off to get married or to cohabitate. All of these things factor in to where 1 and 2 bedrooms have been much more in demand on a relative basis.
Yeah.
Now, of course, 3 bedrooms are still the gold standard. But if I was going to make a bet, if I could buy 2 1 bedrooms or 1 3 bedroom, I'd be more open to the 1 bedrooms right now.
And that's interesting. I mean, you're just saying basically you get more per rent for what that is, so just for the size.
So if every one of them cost $1,000 7 years ago, the 1 bedrooms have gone to $2,000 and the 4 bedrooms have gone to $1,500.
Yeah.
If everything had cost the same exact price before.
Interesting.
And wealth is in real estate is created by the rent and the cash flow. So I'm a max cash flow kind of guy. Wrong way. Oh, this was similar. So the bedroom counts. We've actually been building more 4-bedrooms. In fact, 4 bedrooms have been the most commonly built item, but the least in demand. And so that's kind of data that we see here. And it just makes sense. Supply and demand, when they diverge, and that's exactly what's happened, which is what equates into the pricing changes.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
and that is...
All right, that's it, right?
That's the presentation officially.
All right, good. Well, that's some good stuff to think about. I mean, obviously, the one thing that really stood out to me was the whole affordability thing. Just because, I mean, it's you've got a market where, yes, it's a strong seller's market, but at the same time, it's getting less affordable for buyers, especially since the interest rate changed. So I'm just thinking, I mean, like, now what? What's going to happen? So enlighten us, Brandon. What's going to happen?
So the slow burn possibility. Let's assume nothing breaks, right? Which I'm a little nervous of the Fed breaking something. But let's say that everything just kind of works the way it is. We're going to see a slow churn down into basically lower prices. Like I said earlier, the 20% decrease is actually just mathematical in the sense that eventually enough people that aren't going to have enough cash to make up the difference. Eventually, the top median is not going to be the only people buying houses. And as long as sellers aren't willing to sell, no big deal.
Yeah.
The market pricing will stay.
Sure.
But why do people sell? People sell because if they have to sell for less than they paid for it. Why would somebody sell if they were going to make less money?
I mean, financial distress, obviously.
Financial distress. So what's been super strong, we've been hearing it all over the news. The job market, 500,000 jobs some odd in January, 300-some thousand jobs were added in February. I have some questions as to the accuracy of those numbers, but you know what? I don't say they make big money, but there are very, very smart people that come up with those figures. I'm wondering, though, if we may be misunderstanding them because we're starting to see stagnation in wages. So some of that you're seeing, a lot of the layoffs are happening in the high-value sectors. Tech has actually been tremendously hurt. I see those all over the news, Facebook, Google, everybody laying off thousands, not just 2%. I think it was 13% of Facebook got laid off last year, and they're doing it again this year.
And those are the companies that you think, or they have been making all the money.
They've been making all the money.
So what's going on with that? So I mean, you got that happening, and it's very interesting. And now, obviously you have the SVB bank that just went under.
So that one, we were talking about the slow burn issues.
Yeah.
If people were to lose their jobs.
Yeah.
Then you got the fast burn issues.
Yeah.
So when mortgages are one of the reasons why a house costs as much as it costs. If I had to pay for the house up front in full, the house would be a half of what it is.
Yeah.
And assuming that we're in a hyperinflation market the way Argentina is, those houses, even though there isn't a mortgage market, they actually are already incredibly high, even in dollar terms, because the wealthy will actually put their money into real estate just to protect it from the inflationary pressures, because they have 20% annual inflation, give or take. But to get back to SVB Bank, so the types of things that obviously we didn't have an SVB Bank around here, but the bond market is synonymous with all banks. And that is what hit SVB Bank. So they basically held on to bonds. As interest rates go up, the value of bonds go down. If they're willing to hold them, no big deal. We're just going to make not very much money for a while because the interest rate that I locked in at was 0.5% on some government bond. But when the interest rate goes up, the value of those bonds recalculates. And so let's say they had $100 billion worth of bonds, which I think is more or less the number, and the interest rates went up so dramatically, the value of the bond went down by 20%. Well, 20% of $100 billion is a lot of money. And so they actually had a slight run on the bank where enough people said, I need to take this money out. So they had to actually realize that loss instead of just holding out for that really low return. And because they had to sell those bonds to get the cash, that's what caused the run on the bank. That's what caused them to run out of liquidity. And that's what caused them to fail. There are ways to hedge that interest rate risk. We don't know who all has done it. We know a couple others that didn't that over the past weekend. So we don't know where all the risks are. But the thing about banks specifically is everything is based on confidence.
Yeah.
If I'm confident that my money will be there, if I'm confident that my money will grow, then I'm great.
Yeah.
I'll leave my money there. But as soon, because of the fractional reserve banking system, as soon as 20% of people think I'm going to take my money, that bank can implode overnight, which is exactly what happened. So if that happens, to my point earlier, that if people can't get loans, the value of real estate goes down, and it goes down the elevator, not the stairs.
Yeah. And that's when cash is king.
That's when cash is absolutely king. Cash, gold, etc.
Exactly. So let's maybe just kind of break that down or simplify that a little bit, just in terms of you were talking about the banks investing in bonds. So they take deposits,
Yep.
they invest in bonds, and then when the interest rate goes up, then it means the value of the bond goes down.
That's right.
So that way, so if the depositors go to the bank all at once, or a lot of them do, and they try to get their money, and the bonds have decreased in value, there's less money. The bank is less liquid. There's less money
That's right.
that they have available to give. Then also the fractional reserve system, to where they go and they can lend out, was it 10 times the amount of what they have on reserve?
An individual bank, that the banking system as a whole, that's exactly how it plays out.
Okay.
An individual bank can lend out, say, 90% of, if they have
90%.
If they have $1 billion, they can lend out 900 million.
So they have to keep 10% in reserve.
That's not the exact number. That
Okay.
number changes, but
Well, it's zero
That's
as of 2020, because there was that thing with COVID.
That's right.
So basically, they can lend out however much they want for the most part.
they can lend out
Yeah.
everything they have reserves for.
So they can give all these loans with no reserves. Then the bonds are worth less when the interest rate goes up. So you see where the money disappears. How about that?
And that's where it goes really fast, because they bought the thing that you think would always have value, government bonds.
Yeah, yeah. And
so
people
that-
talk about that too.
Absolutely.
Like that's a safe, secure investment.
It's boring,
One of the
right?
safest. Boring. Yeah.
So, to be fair, and not to cause a bank run at any of our local banks, what the Fed did,
Go get your money, guys. Right now.
so that we don't wind up on CNN for crashing Chattanooga's banks.
Crashing Chattanooga. That's an interesting topic. We'll talk about that next time.
What the Fed did is basically they said, okay, banks, we understand that you bought these treasuries and that that's what we told you to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to loan you money back so that you can pay out your depositors at the full original value of those bonds. So that way it won't cause the disappearing act of $20 billion, at least for one period of 1 year. The hopes on that is that within that year they will be able to figure out some kind of liquidity scenario, whether that's raising capital. Because raising capital can, unless things are very pessimistic, can happen. It just takes a little bit of time. You have to, shake hands and kiss babies and promise people millions and billions of dollars. But that's the stop that basically was going to keep that exact problem from happening again for the period for now. The question is, what happens after the end of a year? They promise that the taxpayer won't have to pay that, but we'll see.
Well, and we can still look at a connection with all this. Like we're talking about the affordability. Well, that's mostly related to all the money printing and all the excess or surplus of capital that's been injected into the economy. Even over the past couple of years, it's been, just trillions of dollars from what I understand. And that's going to obviously cause things to inflate at a higher rate. And then you have, the situations where the banks can lend out all the money they want, and then, people go and get their money and it's not there. Well, no wonder we have a situation like this. I just think that if you just kind of look at it, to me, the money printing and also the manipulation of and I do think it's manipulation of the interest rate. It's been historically low for almost 13 years until last year. So they kept that low after the last market crash to try to stabilize things. That plus injecting a bunch of money really for the past 15 years or so. They've done all these bailouts and everything.
Yep.
So that has led to the situation we're in right now, where sellers don't really know what to do. Then buyers, or a lot of buyers, they can't afford anything. So that's kind of where we're at. I mean, just from the big picture down to even just our local market, that has a significant impact.
It does. Well, I mean, the money spent by the government, particularly when they shoot money into everybody's house, obviously that money goes somewhere, right? So I got however many $2,700 checks or however much everybody got. And what I do, I bought real estate with it, but
Yeah.
but that money got spent buying real estate, which there's an agent, there's a local mortgage broker, there's all this money that just kind of swashes around back into the economy. And mine was in real estate, so that has a lot of tentacles. But I mean, you go and spend it at McDonald's. There's people that work at McDonald's. You go and spend it and buy a Volkswagen. That money goes back into Chattanooga, which is why I buy a Volkswagen, by the way. It keeps money here. Very important. That was one of the things that saved us in 2008 was we just got Volkswagen. So we want Volkswagen. But that money just washes around, and so just because it got injected in the market here at 2.7 trillion or whatever it was, it becomes 50 trillion when it gets spent in between individuals. And when you put it into something like real estate, because it is a leveraged asset, actually it multiplies that impact dramatically. So because you had $10,000, and if you spent that $10,000, now it's done. But if you take that $10,000 and you buy a $100,000 piece of real estate, the bank says, hey, I'll give you $90,000, and then before you bought it, it was only worth 80, so now you've added 20, and it's just all this money just keeps adding in, which is to that 10x type scenario you're talking about. But here's the thing. In an inflationary environment, buy real estate, leverage it to here, you're going to be fine in a few months because everything's going to be more expensive. But the M2 money supply has been decreasing this year for the first time in like 40 years. Well, since they tried to kill inflation in the 70s.
So they're pulling money back out of the economy.
We've seen it was less than 1%, but just the simple fact that they're pulling money out, that hasn't happened in several decades. And so that has the opposite impact, which is the point, right? They're trying to slow inflation. But when you see the money supply actually decrease, you're not just slowing inflation. You're actually pushing the brakes into actually hitting reverse. And so if that continues, which they have not indicated that they want to push the gas again, if that continues, that will cause deflationary pressure, which has the opposite problem. And now the debt you owe is more expensive tomorrow than it is today instead of the opposite.
I have a question real quick. You said something about Argentina, which fascinates me because Venezuela went through serious hyperinflation. Like
they had extreme hyperinflation, yes.
So we won't go there because that's on the so extreme. But Argentina, I know very well. What do you think? Do you think that could potentially happen here? I know you just said pulling money back out, which I understand that too. But do you think, because inflation is the hot topic, do you think that could realistically happen?
Yes. So one of the reasons why it hasn't happened to us, because we actually spend money in a similar way to Argentina. We write as many checks as possible to service as many types of different issues and programs and stimulus and all these types of things, which is very similar to Argentina. They're always trying to spend their way out of a recession. The reason why it isn't is because we get to issue debt in our own currency, unlike Argentina. Everybody who issues debt is like, Argentina, you guys debase your currency all hard. I am not taking debt denominated in that. In fact, you can't get a mortgage in Argentina for that reason. No one's willing to give you debt because they don't know if the inflation is going to be 5% or 50%, because it literally is that level of extreme, which it sounds like you know. What would do that? So in our area, who owns the bonds? When the Treasury, or is it the Fed or the Treasury? I get those confused. When one of them buys the bonds, it's inflationary because the money never leaves the system from somewhere else. Now, when China buys it, okay, they produced a bunch of goods, and they said, "Here, we'll trade you bonds for goods." So there was a equal sides of the balance sheet, right? Whereas when the Treasury or when the Fed buys them, the money didn't exist, and now it does. That's inflationary. That's a lot of what we saw because not all the bonds got sold to fund this debt that we took on for COVID. At what point do people stop buying our bonds because our inflation rate is unfixable? Is the same time we start saying, well, remember when Argentina was the only one? So, and that's the real question. If China and Russia and a few other players stop buying our bonds, yeah, that's exactly what will happen. And that's already starting to, you're hearing some whispers and some things where they are trying to start being able to buy oil in the Chinese yuan, which is one of the reasons why, because we are the world reserve currency, why is that? It's because you can buy oil in US dollars. You had to up until just recently, like very recently. Once that stops being the case, there'll be less demand for dollars. We've got half the money supplies around the world. If all that comes back home, everything that cost $100 is now $200. It won't be that extreme that fast, but it's a process, and it will happen.
It's going to slow the bleed for Argentina, because I've been there a couple of times, and when I was there, it was about 100, 110 to 1.
Now
It's now
300, 220.
or
Well, there's the
more.
blue, and then
Well,
there's
last
the
time I saw
original.
that was 6 months ago. But my buddy who sends me, he's like, dude, you can buy so much stuff down here right now. Not houses. But he's like, you can go get a pizza for next to nothing, whatever. You can go get, but we're talking about real estate. But
Yeah.
anyways, thank you for that. I just,
Yeah.
you know more than I do, and I was like, that sounds fascinating. So.
This is my love, is figuring out the future as best you can with data. So,
Right.
but yeah, that's the biggest challenge with and if inflation if it's not unfixable, buy real estate, take as much debt as they will allow it, because eventually that will go away if they can't contain inflation. In fact, I did a data set on one of the newsletters a few months ago, and I looked at in an inflationary environment and a low interest rate or an interest rate up and down environment. I'll take a high inflation, high rate environment above a low inflation, low rate environment any day of the week. Because inflation on real estate is inflated on the entire asset. So a $200,000 house, if it's a 10% inflation, that's $200,000 plus 10% next year, plus 10% next year, plus 10% next year. Whereas a high interest rate environment is 6-7%, but it's only on the debt portion. And so, yeah, I'll take a high. From a real estate investor perspective, from the healthy of the economy, please stop printing money. But from hey, I'm gonna make money if you're gonna do it. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So it's real talk. But,
Awesome. Does anybody else have any more questions for Brandon?
I got a question for
Cody.
one of you guys.
Yeah.
With what's happening, I guess it could be with either flips or like burrs or anything like that, but specifically with flips, because inventory is increasing just a little bit, the days on market are increasing just a little bit. Are you seeing that like quality of remodel and quality of location are having a bigger impact now, since there's slightly more to choose from? They're getting really picky on like the area and how well the property looks.
I think in general, just any house selling, whether it's a flip or just a homeowner selling their house. I do think that the ones that are in the better areas overall are the ones still getting the multiple offers. The ones that are kind of more like you start going on the outskirts, or areas where it's not as dense with as many people or as many buyers that want to live there. I think that's where you're seeing more of the cutoff in terms of not having the multiple offers or having longer days on market. I mean, in general, right now. But overall, it's still really strong because you still have just such a low inventory level. There's still, overall for most of Chattanooga, there's a lot of buyers. But in terms of like just, being able to sell your house, really fast and getting a premium price or getting above list price, it's right now it's going to be more in the better areas, and even some of those, have, it's cooled off. But you're going to be better off, just to answer your question, in a better area where there's a lot of comps and there's a lot of activity.
Yeah, I just meant like in selling in general, because I remember before when it was like real crazy. People were taking pictures with like their cell phones, and the property was closet doors like falling off, and it's still selling like right away. Whereas now you see those like are 60, 70, 80 days on market, but the properties in better areas are still selling within a couple of weeks usually.
Yeah.
the data suggests for me, and Eddie's going to know more about it from boots on the ground perspective, but the data specifically for me says I'll take a mediocre house in a good area over a amenity-rich house in a mediocre area.
Right.
and that's normally the case actually. But it's been the point that because the constraints of price have kind of pushed both of them down in terms of what's available at a certain price point, this one is still stronger.
So more location than amenities.
More location than amenities. In fact, the house that I bought, it's a manufactured home, so it's very amenities poor in that sense, very quality poor. But it's in the best school system in Catoosa County. I don't expect to have any issues selling it for a fair price.
Right. Okay.
I'm curious, from an inspector's point of view, are you thinking we should encourage our sellers to list or to rent? Are we still in that, seller's market where we're premium dollar for our sale, or should we hold out and rent it for a few years and just see how it plays out?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you brought it up. So what I've been telling people and what I've been doing for myself is, where are you in the cash position right now? Cash, assuming that the Fed does what they're going to do and they're going to destroy demand, that's the mechanism that they use is through interest rates, then cash will be king. So if being a recovering property manager, I knew more than one property owner that was like, hey, I've got $500 in the bank and I just bought this house and I just spent all my money buying it and we need to make it a rental. It's like, well, okay, you need $500 worth of repair before we start.
Just 500?
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty cheap if you ask me. Yeah, at least
we were really good. We were really good at it.
Yeah. I know you're good, but I'm just saying 500.
Well, and that's a house that you didn't think anything was wrong, right? You find these little things where it's something that isn't a huge problem now, but you're going to have people living there for 2 or 3 years. It will become a problem in that period, and you don't want it while the tenant's there if possible. So, I heavily encourage everybody just to look at their cash position because that's one thing that gives you flexibility no matter what's going on. So, in fact, even for myself, I had a house that I intended to keep forever, but moving some pieces of the puzzle around, trying out some alternative investment methods, I sold it. In fact, we just went under contract. We're selling at the end of this month, closing. But part of that decision was, even though I was giving up a 4.75% interest rate, which was mediocre a year ago, it was really good for now. The move that I was able to make because of that is going to give me liquidity of $100,000, and I like to hold things forever. So if they're in a strong cash position and they feel like if they lost their job, if they feel like if the rental's empty for 6 months for whatever reason, and they could still live and not have to go to the bread line, okay, cool, look at renting it. But if you're not in a strong cash position, if you can't cover your expenses for 6 months, lean towards selling. If you're on the lower half of the market. If you're on the half of the market, good luck. You're in a tough spot already. You're in a tough spot already, if you have to sell.
I'm glad you brought up the price of rents. I appreciate your rental calculator where we can just plug in our information and, pop out how much we should charge for rent. I really used that and appreciated that. But are you seeing rental numbers cap? I know with list prices, we're kind of capped out and we're getting sellers that are like, wow, but 6 months ago I could have got, yeah, but we're in a new season. Are you seeing that? And the same thing with rentals? Has rental numbers as far as rental income capping out?
Well, assuming we're talking about say a 3-bedroom, 2-bath rental, just as a baseline, because that goes into very high numbers and also very mediocrely low numbers. When you're under $2,000 with a 3.2, you have a lot more demand. You're gonna have a lot more applications. You're gonna have a lot more interest. When you get above that, you start getting into specialty where you have to compete a lot more. I don't like competition. I like to be able to pick the best potential, family or tenant that would like to live there, so as to make the long-term relationship most profitable and beneficial for everybody. So that's my target. Is I try to be under 2,000, 1,500 to sticky point, 1,000 to sticking point. But honestly, if you're in any kind of mediocre or better area, 2 bedrooms have been a floor of about $1,200, $1,300. So what you're seeing is more compression in terms of the high and the low of what would rent no matter the bedroom count, as opposed to less of the luxury going up and the low end staying low end. If that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
There's an interesting article, it's just like a side tangent, but kind of some of your questions. I was reading this the other day, it was released by Forbes, maybe within the last week, and it talks about the accidental renter. Have you come across that article?
I have not.
You find it interesting, just go to like Google Forbes accidental renter.
Yeah.
Or rental, sorry, not accidental renter. It's talking about just how, because 99% of the loans right now in the US are under 6%. And a lot of these, as you said, like 4.75 on investment property was really low. But they're basically saying because of so many of these people, they're like, we won't get a loan this cheap again, but they do have the liquid or the capital to go buy something new that they could live in. So they're accidentally renting it because it's like, I could make plenty of money and it cash flows really well.
Right.
You know, so, and that's part of why there's a shortage in the inventory.
Sure.
So they're like, 3%, we're never gonna get this again, you know? So it's, anyways, it might help, you might not, but I thought it was a pretty interesting article.
Well, and I appreciate you bringing that up because it kind of brought up another question that I have. Airbnb, short-term rental, or should we go long-term rental?
Cash position, risk and reward. What I've noticed in the Airbnb market for the data that I do track, because I'll occasionally just pull up Airbnb and look at who's renting what. And you see a lot more gaps in general in people's calendars. Some people that do a very good job at it or in a very high demand area, you know, they're still making it. But a lot of those would have been 4 or 5 months booked out a year ago. Now they're like, they got this month looking pretty good. The next month has got a few people booked in it. Ours, we're early to pivot to a long-term or a middle-term person, a nurse that had moved to the area for a period of time, travel nursing. And the value there is, I mean, they like privacy. So smaller unit that they can rent by themselves that you can still rent out profitably. Because they have a stipend, and the stipend is whatever for a housing allowance, $1,000 a week, $500 a week, common numbers. So if you can fit within those metrics and still be a comfortable place near a hospital, still cheaper than a hotel. But there's only so many travel nurses. I mean, COVID's on the slow end at this point. I wouldn't say it's over because people still get COVID, but it doesn't have the same public fear. So they're just. And as people start to, a lot of the jobs that were added were nursing jobs. A lot of people are getting back into working in hospitals and that sort of thing. So the need for travel nurses is actually decreasing. So you don't want to be, if you need it to pivot a property, it's something to look at. If you're thinking, hey, I want to buy this to make it a travel nurse lodge, maybe take a break. Maybe think about, make sure whatever you buy, you can work long term. That's another good metric to kind of cut the market. If I can rent it out long-term profitably, okay, I may still buy it. If I can't, and don't get eye in the sky right now. That's not where people are having a hard time buying food. You really don't want to be the luxury end of the market when, I mean, we don't want to go back to, was it the French Revolution? That could be really bad to be rich then.
And that's interesting. I mean, that's pretty much what I've told people when they've asked me about Airbnb, because I've not really dived into that myself, you know. But to me, it just makes sense that if you can still rent this thing out long term, if the whole short term thing doesn't pan out at some point in the near future, then you're good, you know. Versus, I've seen a lot of people, not just here, but I mean other markets, especially, you know, bigger cities where people have just paid astronomical prices for their Airbnb rentals. And they're able to cash flow and do really well, you know, for a certain amount of time. But if you go and search YouTube about Airbnb bust right now, you'll see a lot of people are hurting with it, you know. So, you know, in a lot of these bigger cities. So I think that's really good. A good way to look at it is if you can rent this thing out, just, you know, like a regular long-term rental, and do the Airbnb for now, then you're good. Because you don't want to be caught up in this whole hype of, I've got an Airbnb, I'm going to tell my friends it's the cool thing to do, which kind of seems like that's why people, in a way, that's why people seem like they've been buying it. It's just because it doesn't really, you know, not everybody, I know, but so it's just kind of one of those trends. Yeah.
I mean, you know, like I believe there's a lot of opportunity, like
right.
a farm, and we have tiny home projects where it's farmcations. People are coming to the area, they're hiking, they're going to Lake Nickajack, they're going to Foster Falls, they're going to Cloudland Canyon. You know, we're 15 minutes away from 4 of those areas. They're looking for experiences. So I think if you can look for short-term rentals close to good experiences like Foster Falls, like Cloudland Canyon, you know, those types of things, I think that there's more of an opportunity than downtown Chattanooga.
Yeah,
That's my opinion.
makes sense.
And with that being said, is you don't have the regulations where you are. Like, that's what's hurting. Not
That's true.
The economy is
Yeah.
going down, so travel slows down. But the
Correct.
big thing around the world, not just here, is the regulations. And I sit in every one of the short-term rental ones because I'm pro whatever.
Freedom.
The point is, well, not pro freedom. I have a property that I've intended to do that, but now you can't. Right? There's the moratorium in the city limits of Chattanooga, and they're extending it again. More than likely, they'll probably extend it another 6 months. So yeah, regulation.
The experiences, people are looking for experiences.
Exactly.
So,
Well, and part of the benefit I think as well, as it relates to yours, is I can go to Florida and spend $5,000 on the hotel and the flight and the this, but there's this farmcation idea just 2 hours away. I can drive to it.
right.
It's hiking, which is the cheapest hobby you can have as long as you have shoes. And so it's kind of a way to moderate down. I'm not going to spend $5,000 on my vacation. I'm going to spend $1,500. I think that's an excellent point.
Could you explain the cash position you're talking about being strong right now?
Yeah. Just start thinking about the realistic possibilities of things that could go wrong, and could you last 6 or 12 months with those expenses that you have. For people with a job, one of the worst things can be if you lost your job. So if you lost your job, what's your debt burden look like? How much is your mortgage? Power bill, water bill, gasoline. What if gasoline doubled while you were jobless? What if food doubled? Because again, you still got to eat. And so the same thing is true of real estate investors with or without a job. If you lost your job and you have 2 rentals that your short-term rental decided that the city said, oh, by the way, grandfathering doesn't work for short terms because of some loophole we found. Well, that's a real risk. They're making stuff up every day. So I don't want to be on the receiving end of the government's anger. Because they have all the guns. So, well, not all of them in Chattanooga, but they've got a lot of them. They're allowed to use them. But it's very tricky in terms of what that number is for everybody. But more or less, think of 4 or 5 bad things happening to you based on your income and your expenses, and see if you can last 6 to 12 months with that. On top of that, put that money work in something. Find a way. Whether that's buying real estate to hedge your risk if you don't have enough exposure there. Lending money. You can, if mortgages are at 7 or 8% for the prime borrower, maybe look at private money. That's actually one of the things that I've been exploring, is lending money to kind of maybe not the prime borrower, but maybe a little higher risk than that, but enough to where I like first lien position debt. It's a great place with, if I do 70% LTV, got a lot of runway to be wrong on the value and still have some cash at the end of the rainbow if things go badly.
Yeah, even if someone totally messes up their rehab, you got it at 70% of the retail value, and let's just say they've put some repairs into it or whatever, you got to take it back. You could still, assuming that the house is still worth at least like 80% of ARV or 90%, right. You could take it back and resell it and make more even with that, like a foreclosing on it, than you would even with your private money. In that scenario potentially. So
exactly, and now I want them to succeed.
Exactly, I'm not saying.
But in the scenario, the worst of the worst
you
case,
can actually, the worst situation,
exactly right.
As a lender, if you position yourself right, you can still actually make even more if you have to take the property back.
That's right.
So,
what's the expectation on charging for hard money loans? I know banks being at 1% percentage level. Is it 1 point, 2 point? Yeah,
12 to 15%.
12 to 15.
Yeah.
Depends on
Wow.
who you're using.
But I mean, that's,
Yeah,
2.5, 3 points.
well, I know, 12 to 15%.
And then two
Interest
to 3
rate.
points up front.
yeah.
Okay, okay.
What up front? 2 to 3 points up front.
So 2 to 3% of the loan value paid at closing, and then 12 to 15% APY, annual percentage.
Okay, we're taking notes.
And still secured by real estate and that sort of thing. So it's for a lot of people that like to flip, that's a very beneficial product because banks don't like flips. Plain and simple, they don't like poor condition purchases.
It
So
makes it easy to just acquire property.
that's right.
I've almost like exclusively stopped using conventional lending just because. I mean, I've had one hard money lender that like I didn't even show them. I didn't even transfer them a bank statement until like 3 days before closing. And I was like, I don't know how that they're still surviving, but
It's mostly asset-based lending.
yeah, it's like here's my information, here's the deal, here's the numbers, and then like I'll see you in a couple weeks when we close or whatever. But some of the local people I've seen like 12 to 15%, and then but I just Kiabi, which I've had some issues with them like being late on closing sometimes, but or like you show up, you're like at the closing table and they're like funding the deal late. But anyways, they were at like 9.9, 10% basically for a while, and I just got a quote on one like I think it was within 30 days ago. So
Wow.
you just have to kind of like look around, and if you do deals, if you've already done a couple of deals with them too, they're willing to work with you a little bit.
Yeah, rates usually get
Especially-
better for experience
Yeah,
on
especially
those.
points and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I will say in general, unless you have a good deal, don't buy a mediocre deal right now with hard money. There's a lot of pressure with hard money that a lot of them are only 9, 12 month turnovers. So if the market does take a big hit and 12 months doesn't look as rosy as you hoped, now if you're buying at really good values and you have Eddie as a realtor to help you do that, or a wholesaler or whatever he's got going on, then you can make those things work. And where hard money, the simplicity of getting in and out of a property through hard money can be very beneficial.
And I would also look at, like, if you're going to flip something right now, even though the market is not really in a major decline or anything, there's still that steady drop in the median price point and slight increase in inventory and increase in days on market. I would still add, another 10%, 5 or 10% buffer on top of your profit margin for your rehabs, just in case, because a lot of people have been, having really thin margins the past several years, and it's worked because a lot of times they'll go and sell something and they'll make even more money. I know one of my friends. I mean, he goes and has bought, or actually several friends that I know, or people that I know that have done this. They'll buy stuff, and then it'll be worth 10 or 15, 20% more by the time they're done in several months, and they have that as an added bonus, which is great. But now you really need to look at it the opposite, which is you need to make sure you've got, an extra buffer in there for your flips in case it is worth, 5% or 10% less in 3, 4, 6 months, or however long it's going to take to do the rehab.
The other thing I think, exactly right, the other thing I really like to look at is options. Look at, okay, I know this is what I think it'll sell for. What will it rent for? If I had to.
Different.
A lot of people
strategies.
saved their tails in 2008 by pivoting, and that helped tremendously. With some properties, you can look at them and know that, okay, I've got land. What can I do with land, right? So I maybe wouldn't have been interested in a 5-acre, house with a house on before, but now I know just because there's some pivot potential, whether I do a farmcation, whether I do chickens or whatever out of it, maybe I move into it. That's another thing. I love the ability for somebody to want to buy a flip house and they're like, oh, I only own one house. I'm like, okay, so is your house, could it become that pivot? Can you rent that out? Could you sell that for profit if things go badly and move into this one? So all those little things that you can do, particularly if you're smaller, that allows you a lot more flexibility. Heck, I had to move into my house just to be able to Airbnb my basement. So that was another solution that, because the way Catoosa County reads it is you have to live there and to make it work. So it worked out really well.
Is that new? Or has it always been that way?
No, there's 2 living quarters on it.
Okay.
And so if I rented it out separately and they're attached, so if I rented out both of them, it would be considered a duplex, and I'm not zoned for that.
Gotcha, okay.
So that was the tricky part about that. So that has to be a roommate
Rules
type
change
scenario.
so quickly between Dade all the way over there to Catoosa. I mean, Dade, you can do whatever you want, and then it's like,
Dade's great.
yeah.
Be more like Dade.
Well, thanks for your time.
Yeah, absolutely.
This was beneficial.
I got one more question to kind of go piggyback off his about just being, just looking at like your liquidity and all that stuff. Do you think that you should have obviously 6 to 12 months of like your living expenses, but should you have that? I guess how do you know when you're good? Like I'm pretty safe to keep buying. Like should you have that plus the extra capital to keep buying, or do you think like how do you know when it's like maybe I should sell this property now so so I have more cash and I can capitalize on more deals since we're starting to see more of them. Like you might have money, like I'm looking to buy deals right now, but it's like, okay, if I bought a deal that was stretching it a little bit, meaning like the down payment was more or whatever, the rehab was bigger,
Right.
then obviously I would be less liquid, and then if something hit the fan, then it might change up your position. So you think you should have like 6 to 12 months plus like whatever money you're planning on investing?
In a sense, yes. I think right now, underwrite any deal as if the mortgage is at the current rate and it will never go down.
Right, yeah.
Also, anytime you're dealing with contractors, put a large buffer in for that.
Time.
And time. Time and money. In 2 weeks, it'll always be done. Just ask me again in 2 weeks. But no, absolutely. And I try to keep a pot of money that basically is everything. I'm very conservative. So if everything I had was vacant and I had to pay the mortgage and the utilities and make some repairs, could I still survive?
Right.
So one of the ways I did that without having to necessarily put all of my cash is on my personal home, I got a line of credit as a second mortgage. So that gave me access to $100,000 that doesn't cost me much of anything if I'm not using it. But in a scenario where 14 different things go wrong, which did happen in 2008, I have a lifeline to get through and hopefully try to start generating some income from some alternative sources to buy through. So that's making sure you have some access to some type of alternative income or alternative cash source as well can help with some of the liquidity of, you can't plan for 14 things going wrong every time, but you can say, okay, if those 14 things go wrong, here's where I can still get some cash that doesn't require me to go bankrupt first. Get those lined up now. I would, if you don't have them now, before the banks tell you no, because there's some great banks you can get some 30-year HELOC locked in. As long as banking system exists, you'll have access to money.
Look, here it is, Cody. It's 6 to 12 months of your expenses, your funds for investment, whatever percentage you want to do for that, 10% for, wow, the government really is that stupid, and then another 10% for, okay, here comes the zombie apocalypse. Right. That's how you divide it up.
Oh, I just have bullets and ammo for that.
That's the zombie apocalypse part.
Yes. Well, yeah, that one too. The government's also that stupid sometimes, I think about it.
So both. I got you.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys.
All right, thanks.
Thanks.